Chapter 6. Watched. Hiccup's breath came in short, shallow pants. A stitch had formed in his side at least half a mile back, and the back of his left ankle twinged with every step.
Come on, I'm sorry,
he pleaded to his thundering pursuer. He shifted his heel in the dirt with the next stride and made an abrupt change in direction. A massive paw swiped air where his head was moments before.
I didn't know you were going to eat it. The meat was just there.
Hiccup dived under a cluster of low-hanging branches where his stature worked to his advantage. Unfortunately, the thickness of the branches wasn't enough to stand up to the fireball and subsequent body that crashed through seconds later.
You already ate most of the carcass anyway.
Hiccup sensed the heat approaching and ducked just in time to avoid the fire sailing over his head.
Those hairy...
His attempted defense cost him his footing in a rabbit hole. He stumbled, just managing to get his weight back under him before a huge force slammed him to the ground. Hiccup moaned and coughed.
Doofus, I can't breathe.
The dragon shifted its weight so only his forelegs were draped across the boy's torso.
Better,
Hiccup sighed, still trying to catch his breath.
But really, I really don't know you were going to eat that part. It was just there, calling to me.
Toothless snorted. The hot air washed over Hiccup's face. The boy grimaced. I know. I'm just getting you into shape.
Hey, I'm fast enough. Look how long it took you to catch me.
I still caught you.
It took a rabbit hole for you to win.
Toothless favored Hiccup with a long, wet lick up the side of his face. His tongue was smoother than a human's, much like a dog's, extra slippery and extra slobbery.
Ew, gross, get off, come on.
Hiccup laughed, pushing Toothless's face away with both hands. Toothless stood and backed off, allowing the human to pull himself onto unsteady feet.
Ugh.
Hiccup's hand came to rub the bottom half of his ribs.
I think you might have cracked a rib,
he complained. Toothless crooned and bumped Hiccup in the side with his head as they began to make their way back to camp. Then consider this stamina training. Hiccup winced at the touch, pushing at the scaled brow.
You're so mean to me.
Toothless gave his signature gummy smile. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Hiccup shook his head, smiling wildly, and hopped up onto Toothless's saddle with skilled ease.
Let's fly back, you big bully. It's dark enough out.
Twilight had approached during their romp across the Wessex countryside, making the duo appear nothing more than a dark shadow against the dim sky, passable as a figment of the imagination. Though tired from the unexpected run, Hiccup always had energy to perform a few acrobatics in the air. He tested the maneuverability of the upgraded footworkings, pulled off sharp spins and suspended loops. Though more durable, the fixings now had to be oiled from time to time to keep from squeaking. Hiccup also feared the balance of weight would be altered and had been brainstorming on ways to evenly burden the other side of the saddle. The fly back to camp took just as long as the run away from him. Neither male could seem to help himself once up in the air. The natural, euphoric feeling that flight brought proved a hard thing to pull from. Eventually they slowed above the general area of the camp, and Hiccup squinted against the darkness until he found their exact location. As soon as Hiccup dismounted, Toothless shook his muscles loose and waited for his human to remove the saddle. Once free, the dragon heated the earth with his fire, netting the residual sparks into the ground before settling into his warm bed. Hiccup narrowed his eyes with envy. He had been trying to unbuckle his flying harness, but his fingers moved slower than usual, his blood prioritizing the warming of his heart. It came loose after some fumbling, and he tossed it onto his woven pack, filled to the brim with the rest of his belongings.
Looks like winter's going to catch us before we can escape it,
Hiccup said, rubbing his numb fingers together. Toothless, couchant, cocked his head as if to say, "That's what you get for being frail, mammal." The fire Hiccup started for their dinner had been reduced to a crackling pile of glowing cinders in their absence. Hiccup stuck out his bottom lip as he observed the dismal source of heat.
Guess I gotta get some more wood,
he sighed. He looked at Toothless's warm bed one last time, longing to curl up next to his friend and sleep. But he knew from experience that he would wake up halfway through the night needing another spring of warmth. There was no helping it.
I'll be back,
he called behind him.
Probably.
And I'll be here, definitely. Hiccup grabbed the long black coat before heading off. It would give him a little extra protection against the cold and help avoid detection from predators. He moved through the trees with a learned silence, picking up good candidates for burning along the way. Every third or fourth hunt, Toothless would push Hiccup to bring in the kill. Hiccup would try to mimic Toothless's movements in hunting, toe-heel steps, knowing where brittle twigs and leaves lay, moving with the wind and the sounds of nature. If a creature 10 times his size could move silently through a forest, then he had no excuse. And with his only weapon a dagger, he refused to use Astrid's axe, even though he still kept it with him, he had no choice but to improve his knife-throwing abilities. Injuring an animal with an inadequate throw and then having to kill it up close was no routine he liked to repeat. A soft hissing noise sounded above his right ear. Hiccup sprang forward and turned. He sucked in his breath and stared at the motionless leaves hanging from the tree. For a moment, nothing emerged, and he was willing to chalk it up to imagination. His shoulders sagged, relieved of the tension, and he strengthened his hold on the branches he had collected.
"This is good,"
he muttered. He was more than ready to get back to Toothless. They performed the usual circling of the area several times to make sure no humans would stumble upon them, but creatures of any other sort remained an unknown to him with his human senses. Hiccup took a single step forward towards the camp. The hissing came again, and with it a body fell from the trees, hitting the ground with a light thud and rearing up on its only 2 legs. Hiccup jumped back with a cry that sounded far too loud in his ears. The creature hissed at him. Hiccup fought the urge to pull out his dagger. It could have been a subspecies of dragon for all he knew. In many ways it had the appearance of a miniature green nightmare, stretching only about 3 feet long from tail to nose, with 2 stubby hind legs and clawed wings for arms. Miniature nightmare-like horns adorned its head. Hiccup found its appearance disquieting. Rather than put up any reasonable defense, Hiccup took a breath, willing calmness over his heart, rearranged the wood under one arm, and held his free hand out in front of him in a placating manner.
"It's okay,"
he cooed.
"I'm not going to hurt you."
It hissed again, its long forked tongue snaking far beyond its jaws. The eyes gleamed yellow, cutting through the darkness with pupils so slit they might not have been there at all. Hiccup moved back, still with his hand out, 1 step at a time. A louder, deeper hissing reverberated behind him. Hot breath leavened his hair. Hiccup sprang away with a shriek, manly, of course, and managed to keep hold of the firewood by the edge of his fingertips. Another of the strange dragon had appeared from a dry brush, this one browner in color, and looked to be as long as Hiccup was tall.
"Oh, crap,"
Hiccup breathed. He began to rethink his pacifist approach as the larger reptile slithered towards him, keeping low to the ground. A complete mouth of serrated teeth gleamed up at him with the last the sun's light offered. He slowly moved his hand towards his belt, his dagger, as he retreated. He increasingly became more aware of the movement occurring before and around him. There were more of them, more of this strange creature, and one by one they materialized from under ferns and over tree branches. Hiccup closed his hand on the handle of his knife. He didn't want to attack. He wanted to reach them like he reached Toothless. The largest of the lot coiled, and Hiccup braced himself with slightly bent knees and a discreet but firm hold of his weapon. He would have to drop the firewood, of course, when the time came to defend himself, and that errant thought nettled him. He felt calling for Toothless would provoke them into prematurely attacking, and felt any sudden movement on his part would result in his immediate death. If he could just get close enough to the camp, then maybe Toothless would smell that something was up. The apparent ringleader of the little dragons gave another hiss. It bordered on a roar.
"Just calm down. I'm leaving,"
Hiccup said as evenly as he could. Either didn't like his voice or didn't believe him, because the dragon reared back, spreading its wings.
"Please don't make me hurt you,"
he begged. He left civilization for dragons, or a dragon at any rate. He couldn't die by them. Hiccup twitched part of the blade from his belt, prepared to swing forward, and the movement set the creatures into motion. He dropped the sticks and swung the weapon outward. Before the blade touched scales, a black blur shot in front of him, and the closest dragon was caught between a set of powerful jaws. Toothless crunched down on the smaller creature with crushing force before tossing it to the side, ready to receive the onslaught of attackers. Shrieks filled the air, hissing, clawing reptiles descended from all sides on the Night Fury. Toothless was fast and precise in his defense. No movement wasted, every claw stripe struck true, every chomp latched into prey, and every tail swing bludgeoned the dragons into solid tree trunks. For the moment, Hiccup could only stand and watch. The shock of Toothless's appearance rooted him into place. Sometimes, amid the purring and the nuzzling, he forgot that, in addition to being his best friend and companion, Toothless was a dangerous and powerful and magnificent beast. While Hiccup saw protection, everything else in the world saw the ultimate predator. They were so far apart in abilities, it wasn't even funny. And then the little dragons began retreating back into the forest, disappearing behind leaves and roots, screeching obscenities in their language. The scuffle was brief, only taking seconds for the many creatures to realize they were outclassed and for Hiccup to gather his wits. Toothless snorted a puff of smoke at the final flicker of their tails. "Attack my human, will you?" He spat a fireball at the motionless body of the leader, and in seconds the sickly smell of burning flesh reached Hiccup's nose. The boy grimaced. The grip on his dagger relaxed.
"Thanks, Toothless,"
Hiccup said, voice thick with gratitude. Toothless nuzzled the underside of his chin, ruffling Hiccup's feathery hair with his breath. Hiccup, in turn, wrapped his arms around Toothless's head in an appreciative hug. "You're too trusting. I know you. I know you tried to make friends with those varmints, you foolish boy."
"Can't help it,"
Hiccup said, trying to laugh it off. He turned, releasing Toothless from his hold, and picked up the wood he dropped.
"I guess I wanted to make some more friends."
Toothless snarled. "Did you think they were cute little dragons? Those were of a lesser intelligence, nothing more than rats. They wouldn't have understood you."
"I'm sorry,"
Hiccup mumbled. Toothless followed close to Hiccup for the duration of his firewood collecting. Nothing else attacked, but Hiccup kept thinking he heard Phantom hissing all the way back to camp. As soon as he got the fire up to par, Hiccup sat up in his usual spot against Toothless. The gentle rising and falling of the dragon's stomach created a soothing, oceanic motion that drew Hiccup into a sense of security. He pulled out his journal from his pack and immediately began sketching out the little dragon he had just seen. He couldn't recall ever seeing it in the dragon manual, and from his brief encounter he gathered it was a territorial pack creature. He tried to remember if it had one talon or three on its winged foreclaw, or if the tail had any fins. That should have been the first thing he looked at, seeing how tail fins were a specialty. Hiccup didn't know when his cold stick slowed in its detailing. He didn't know when it trailed off the paper, leaving a lamentable, dark line. He never realized it fell out of his limp hand as slumber overtook him. Hiccup jolted awake, feeling unusually disoriented, like something was out of place. He was still in his campsite, and the fire still burned at his feet, though flamed lower than he remembered. The space felt empty somehow, like...
"Toothless?"
The dragon was nowhere to be found. Not behind him, or against him, or on the other side of the fire, prowling around the camp. Hiccup sat up straighter, unnerved, and something shifted over his lap. His journal lay open, the picture of that little dragon he faced earlier sketched onto its brittle pages. Of course, he really didn't know if it was a dragon, having never seen anything like it. "A wyvern," Hiccup gasped as the last thing he expected to find deep within the Wessex woodland stood over him, a young woman. He crab-walked backwards, his journal tumbling from his lap. She stepped to follow him. An underdress of deep blue brushed the dirt, a hem decorated in an intricate gold braid concealed her feet. Turquoise brooches fastened a beige apron skirt over top. A multitude of decorative amber and glass beads hung between the clasps. She appeared nothing more than a maiden Viking with her long brown hair parted into a thick braid over each shoulder and knobbed at the end like ruffnuts. Blue-gray eyes sparkled with amusement. Hiccup couldn't rationalize an explanation for her sudden company and Toothless's mysterious absence other than,
"Are you Toothless?"
he asked stupidly. Even as he said it, he knew it was wrong. Toothless and this woman had a completely different presence. She laughed, delicately, drawing her hand over her mouth. "Do you think Toothless is a female?" she questioned back. Even her voice sounded surreal, light with laughter and warm. Hiccup grimaced.
"Thor, I hope not,"
considering how many times he'd bathed in front of the dragon. "My name is Gudrid," she introduced herself. She took a few more steps towards him, light and silent.
"Where's Toothless?"
Hiccup asked, refusing to let his guard down. Gudrid stopped her approach when he looked ready to bolt. Instead, she drew her dress up around her and set it neatly to the ground, a good couple yards away from him. Hiccup had to wonder if she was cold. She had no cloak or fur for this chilly night.
"You have no reason to fear me," she said gently. "I am your Wörter." "My what?"
The word, while vaguely familiar to him, completely escaped his comprehension.
"Wörter,"
she repeated for his benefit.
"Your warden."
"And what sort of job is that?"
Hiccup asked. The skepticism would not leave his tone. It was the distinct lack of night fury that set him off, otherwise he wouldn't have minded talking to such a pretty girl. He was mostly sure he was taller than her, too, which he liked. The woman tisked.
"You're always the cynic, aren't you? Well, Hiccup, your soul is my responsibility. I'm here to guide you into shaping your destiny." She peered at him through the veil of her dark bangs. "The gods have a plan for you, Hiccup Haddock." The absurdity of the statement struck Hiccup, but he sobered before he could scoff at it. He looked away into the movement of the fire and drew one knee to his chest.
"I'm not a haddock."
Gudrid turned her head.
"No, I suppose you're not anymore, are you?"
Hiccup glowered at her, and her mouth twitched as though she struggled to keep her face straight. Hiccup still had too much baby fat on his cheeks to genuinely pull off intimidation.
"Let us focus more on what you are rather than what you're not,"
Gudrid said. Hiccup's lip curled.
"That's easy. I'm a traitor. Oh, no, wait."
He laughed, derisive.
"I'm a coward."
Gudrid frowned.
"That is enough, Hiccup."
For a moment, Hiccup looked as though it wasn't enough, like he wanted to continue being snarky until Toothless came back. But he knew issuing an attitude wouldn't help him find the dragon faster. Where was he? As though able to read his thoughts, and Hiccup suspected she could, Gudrid said,
"Never mind where Toothless is. He's fine. I'm here to speak about your choices as of late."
"Oh, yeah. Treachery and deception. I'm really going places."
Hiccup stopped at her disapproving look.
Sorry."
"The choices you make are unique, Hiccup, not poor. You have an ability to see beyond what you know to be true and find what really is true. You have a strong sense of morals and mercy which, while viewed unfavorable by the people you are fostered from, matter beyond this life."
"So I'm all set when I die,"
Hiccup surmised. He sounded anything but enthused.
That's great."
Gudrid pursed her lips, perhaps realizing she could not coerce the sarcasm out of him.
"Do not separate worlds into life and death," she said. "The border between them is as wide as it is vague. Now, listen to me, Hiccup, for you are going to need to understand some things to continue down this path."
Hiccup opened his mouth to ask what path, what was she talking about, but Gudrid spoke over him.
"There are bonds in this world, bonds between souls. It is what makes us truly alive. And with each bond are different magics to tie us and different circumstances to meet. You and Toothless have one such bond."
"Magics,"
Hiccup intoned. Gudrid pressed on.
"You showed each other mercy. You had him helpless at knife point and chose to let him live. He had you unarmed under his claws and chose to let you live. And what's more, you had no reason to trust each other, no means to communicate. It's a bond of blind faith."
Hiccup hadn't realized his jaw lay slack until he spoke again.
"Blind faith?"
"Mm-hmm."
Gudrid smiled, looking quite pretty.
"And the string that ties you is known as understanding."
Hiccup continued to stare at her, blank. Gudrid stared back.
"You haven't noticed the change over the last several weeks?"
she asked.
"Change?"
She appeared caught between exasperation and mirth.
"Do you mean to say that you haven't noticed your increased understanding of Toothless?"
Hiccup's head spun, completely taken aback.
Well, that is, I thought,
Was this true? He couldn't remember ever hearing Toothless speak, but somehow, over the course of their time together, he could understand him. Hiccup had attributed this to his own mind filling in the silence to match Toothless's actions when, in reality, there had been no silence. How could he not have noticed? Gudrid watched the expressions run across his face and smiled at his exact moment of realization. Hiccup might have been more unsettled by her intimate reading of him, as though they had known each other a lifetime, but he hadn't the mind for it now.
If you are aware of it now, it will come to your attention the next time you speak to him,
Gudrid said. Hiccup couldn't help himself.
Yeah, well, who knows when that will be, since he seems to have disappeared, and you're in no hurry to clue me in.
Rather than reproach him, Gudrid smiled again, leaning forwards to bring their faces uncomfortably close. Hiccup was startled to find she somehow came to sit right next to him in the time of the discussion.
You will see him in just a moment,
she said in that feathery, warm voice. She brought herself even closer. Their noses were practically touching. His annoyance with her vanished, much as their surroundings had. Hiccup couldn't move, didn't think he wanted to, and the breath ghosting over his lips became a soft kiss. Hiccup jerked, finding himself flat-backed on the ground. Light filtered down on him in misshapen patches, one falling over his right eye with an uncomfortable sting. He scrunched his face, realizing it was a dream. A hormonal dream, going by the ending. Something large and smooth nudged at his temple, and hot air washed over his forehead in short puffs. Hiccup wasn't alarmed in the least.
Toothless!
He cried, using a hand to push the great head away from him, a large smile fixed on his face. Even though it was a dream, Hiccup felt relieved to know Toothless was still with him. The smile dimmed as he noticed his Toothless' anxious wiggling.
What's wrong, bud?
Wrong? I believed you would never wake up. Nothing I did would awaken you. I licked you. Licked you. You hate that. Nothing happened. I would have thought you dead in your sleep if it weren't for your snoring.
Hiccup's cheeks puffed.
I do not snore.
Do too?
No, I'm not playing that game. I don't. And furthermore, I happen to be in the middle of a really, really bizarre dream where there was this woman and Toothless?
Yes.
I can understand you.
Yes, and?
No, I mean, I can really understand you. I hear what you're saying.
It was weird. So weird. The dragon's lips, or snout, weren't moving, but the words resounded, not in his head, but in the air around him. As though Toothless actually spoke aloud. They simply weren't tangible. Toothless was silent for a moment, and then,
You could not always understand me?
Hiccup shook his head.
No, I just got a feeling of what you meant. Remember when we first met? I couldn't get anything from you. And then I kind of did, but I didn't think...
Toothless moaned.
That does make certain moments more understandable. I thought you were simply stupid.
Hiccup reeled.
Hey, you're the one who didn't realize I didn't understand you.
Allow me consideration. You were the first human I had ever attempted to commune with.
Right, and you were the first dragon I tried to talk to. So, no bragging.
Toothless snorted at him. Hiccup got the sense he was amused.
This does explain why no other humans would respond to us dragons. I suppose humans can only understand verbalized speak? At Hiccup's pleased nod, Toothless asked, Then how did you come to understand me?
Oh, right, you'll love this,
Hiccup began, ready to fill in his friend on the verder, whom he still didn't quite believe. He paused, noticing the neglected journal lying face down by his knee.
But first,
he picked it up, flipping it over to the last page used, and above the sketch he wrote, Wyvern. He grinned, slapping the book shut, and faced the impatient dragon. He had a feeling there was a whole other side to dragons he was about to uncover.